Ever wondered how curse words like fucking somehow became such a huge part of the average person's vocabulary? One should stop and think about that sometime, because it's really something to think about. If you consider the curse words you hear probably yourself saying on a regular basis, you might realize there's no way these words organically came to make up such a huge part of our vocabulary. These words are never used within the context of their original meaning. Most curse words are ambiguously referring to sexual body parts or sexual acts in one way or another, nothing you would expect to come up in one's day-to-day vocabulary because they don't reflect on what a day-to-day life consists of at all. There's no reason for them to come up this often. These aren't topics anyone refers to when talking about pretty much anything that's relevant. These words have a certain meaning. They are never used within the context of their original meaning. They have instead come to plague all means of communication, and we're basically adding them onto random phrases, but they pretty much mean nothing. Well, if we come to that, how do you explain this really bizarre phenomenon in our language? Well, it's pretty simple. How do you make something that's not relevant become relevant? Moral outrage. How do you make it controversial and base? By making this moral outrage be completely and utterly retarded. That's one way. So when your parents tell you in the year 2023 that they're not superstitious, imagine being superstitious in this day and age, but this word is strictly off limits because, well, I guess I am sort of superstitious after all. What can I say? So don't you dare say this word, that word, and all of this. Don't say them. Your reaction tends to be to laugh it off, because that's absurdly silly. Your parents telling you that? Come on. Even a 4-year-old sees through it, finds it funny, and that's why they start saying these words when they otherwise would have never known these words existed. Because again, when do they actually come up in everyday life? Never. Well, the whole idea of curse words, if you think telling your kids not to say them isn't really superstitious, consider what you call curse words. You call them curse words. Why? Well, I don't really know, but I could assume the word curse might have something to do with it. How do you describe these words? Don't say them. It might put a curse on you. Voldemort, no. That's the one who must not be named. Just say F word if you really need to refer to that word, because Voldemort might put a curse on you. Except Harry Potter is fiction, and that superstition only makes sense in a magical world. The world we live in, however, you're just being superstitious. So when you, as an adult, tell your children that these quote-unquote curse words are not to be used under any circumstance, otherwise you might get punished, you inevitably end up having all the kids doing the cool thing, which is obviously to rebel against their parents' status quo. Even they, as children, can unequivocally recognize as being retarded, and as a result, these words that would have died off have instead been revived more than they ever could have been, thanks to your efforts to shut them down. Congratulations, now you know it doesn't work. And this is also how misinformation spreads, if you didn't know. Somebody tells you not to wear a mask during a pandemic, you ignore them because that's lunacy, and ignoring such things is what normal people do, until you see that the authorities aren't doing as much. In fact, they're censoring it. What do they have to hide? Well, with that said, what would you do if you wanted to make a word disappear? The one thing you could try, see if yourself with that skull nuts, is to say, don't say it. It's bad and it's racist. And you may be right at first. You may have been right 200 years ago when this word had a very different meaning and interpretation. One thing you could do if you wanted to replicate what we have with curse words in general is to make this word the super forbidden word. Beast through strength, go for it on it, just like the war on drugs, because when you put everything you have into forcing an idea that doesn't make sense to people down their throats, it tends to change their minds. Now, one thing you could do is make this a super forbidden word, and then justify giving this word its status through the very noble cause of fighting for racial equality. And then what you could do is you could say, and that's why, boys and girls, in the name of equality, we forbid this word from being used specifically by people who aren't of the right skin color. You can't let any race say it, that would be racist. Now saying this word that you wouldn't have known about if we didn't make such a big deal out of it must not be used under any circumstance because we have autism is one thing, but saying this word cannot be used because if you don't favor segregation, you're racist, that's a whole other step, and it will obviously get you much further. Then you could add the cherry on the cake and say, but it's especially forbidden if you use the hard R. If you're going to say it, you're going to have to make fun of black people for having a list, because if you don't do that, you're even more racist. Now, it doesn't get much better than that. What do you think is going to happen if you do this? Well, first of all, if you didn't know where the idea of the hard R comes from, you might have heard black people saying words that end with elevator, perpetrator, singular, you name it. What you'll tend to notice is that they'll tend to pronounce these sense elevator, perpetrator, singular. That's just how they speak, just like how I speak the way I do because I'm from France. I have an accent and so do they. But yeah, if we're going to say that despicable word, we better mock black people as we say it or we're doing something wrong. So after a rough start, speaking of which, why would there be a moral outrage over this word in the first place? Well, in fact, if you follow the reasoning behind that one, it's pretty straightforward and I wouldn't tend to disagree with it at all. If you're going to say this word is hateful, it was used as a derogatory term to dehumanize people who deserve better, and we're not in their place. We never will be, and we wouldn't want to be. So maybe we should show them some respect and have the decency not to say something that was meant to be hurtful and dehumanizing to people who went through hell and back while being called that over and over again. That's perfectly fair. That was my original take as soon as I learned what that word meant. I thought, yeah, that's very hateful and inconsiderate, and I should show some respect, not say Heil Hitler to a bunch of Jews, not say this either, because if you do, you're being an asshole. Fair enough. Now, this philosophy I originally had started changing when I realized this word and its connotation had entirely changed. Black people today don't seem to be worried about it. You'd imagine if their great-grandparents were to see them say it, knowing those were probably their great-grandkids, and genes matter so much to so many people, they'd be even more offended were they to hear them say it, even more so than they would be when white people say it. It hits closer to home. But the thing is, as much as it's fine and decent to respect that these people lived hell and this word was used to dehumanize them, they wouldn't appreciate this. These people are no longer here to be heard or to have any type of disapproval. Is this word still offensive? If it's wrong to say, who is it hurting? Well, since those people have died long ago, it's up to us now to decide how we want to move forward with this. And it turns out, much as this approach of it's bad makes sense, that's not how we move forward. If you go to public school like I did, you'll hear people saying the nigger word about as often as you hear people saying the word fucking. And that's in high school. People use that word a lot. Now, if you're going to stay true to the principle of racial equality, if you're going to take any lesson from the tragedies that led to this sensitized nature of this word, it's that racial equality cannot be compromised. We can do this two ways. We can either keep the word as is, you shouldn't say that because you're just dehumanizing people, or you could say this word now means something else. We use it to say homie, or really anything. That's really the best way to eradicate a hateful word if it's somehow still haunting people you haven't lived through the experiences. Just turn it from something hateful to say how you greet one another. What's up, my nigger? One thing you absolutely shouldn't do under any circumstance is to say this word can only be used by people of this skin color. And if you're white and you say that in public, just know you're likely to get beaten up. You should expect that. While you have to hear others around you say it on a regular, non-stop, but you can't repeat what you hear because your race isn't qualified. In fact, it's just suffering the consequences of what it's previously done to our race. Just one weird little compromise compared to all the torment you put us through. And when I started hearing this was the reasoning, I was pretty angry, since I am a compassionate person just like any other, regardless of my skin color, and I therefore despise the despicable act that slavery was, and feel as much sympathy for those who were victims of it as any black person would. We're all human. They did this to them. I didn't do this to anybody. Your local cop didn't kill George Floyd. I haven't enslaved anyone. And punishing me for these heinous acts I find just as despicable as anyone else would. That implies responsibility and culpability. Hey, black person, get out of my store. Have you not heard how much of a toll theft has had on my business? How would you feel as a black person if somebody told you that? Probably angry. You should feel this way. And that's how I felt when I was written up twice in 10th and 11th grade respectively, for saying the nigger word by two different teachers, by the way. The first time I wrote it on the board because a friend dared me to. The second time a black friend of mine was saying it in the middle of class, saying nigger, and I would repeat it, and he would say it louder, and I would repeat it, then he would say it louder. Well, guess what? I got in trouble, not him. And both times I was written up, you get 4 of those, by the way, you get suspended. A write-up brings you a full day in detention. Well, both times the teacher specified that I was getting written up, not for the use of an inappropriate word, but because it was wrong for me particularly to be saying it given my skin color. Now again, people wouldn't be having too much of an issue with this if this was just some random word that's never really used. However silly it might still be, if there's a stupid rule that people find important for no reason, but abiding by that rule just makes people happy, most people wouldn't mind that at all. Say if an Indian tribe or group has some ritualistic song they don't really like having others use because to them it symbolizes their belief in their religion and they deem it insensible. Sure, spare their feelings. We won't say it, fine. That's not really a problem. The problem comes when these forbidden words make up a decent bit of the vocabulary of those around you all the time when people want to start saying words if they hear them a lot. That's how we learn to speak. When we have to manually refrain from speaking like others because we know we have a specific skin tone and therefore that right is reserved for someone else, that's wrong. And it's not only racist against white people, this mentality is also racist against black people. How do you spur up anti-black hatred? Maybe by pulling some old ideas no one even stands by anymore, like white supremacy out of your asshole, pretending it's still mainstream when there are more flat earthers than white supremacists in the United States today, and then making up a racist argument from that in the name of reversing the racism, when this racism only exists in the past anyway. You can't change the past, but you can rectify it with the future. Then go on to try rectifying it, not with equality, but with the same ideas you're complaining about that don't exist anymore, except with the races reversed. And finally, you try making this the status quo through fear-mongering and by trying to get black people to develop a victimhood complex. CNN and MSNBC have been particularly good at that over the years. They hate you, they exist in big numbers. In fact, they're all around you, and if you don't believe us because you've looked around you and you believe your lying eyes over us, well, here's this anecdote we found, and here's our word that this isn't just an anecdote. We could pull up stats instead of doing this, but that wouldn't really prove our point. By the way, quick side note, black people being on average poorer than white people today isn't due to anyone's current hatred. The level of social acceptance of previously marginalized groups has been growing exponentially over the past century as science has been getting ahead of religion and as hateful ideas we now recognize don't fit our current society quite well. However, the rate at which wealth is redistributed throughout generations is much slower. Inheritance and culture play a big role in this, and skin color happens to be inherited too. None of that is racist, it's just a sad price that has to be paid for the past we thankfully chose to move away from. If you don't like that reality because you don't like waiting because nobody does, I'm sure moving us a step back from racial equality will help you. Good luck with that, but in the meantime, back to the present when inheritance is very racist, and all those people around you also are. How do you get the checks to come in if people don't hate one another? What are you going to cover on your show now that racism is fixed? So your job becomes to make sure it stays alive and well, to the detriment of, well, probably your viewers more than anyone, but these people don't have a moral compass, so it's fine. So that's how you bring white supremacy back, by pretending it still is real and that the only counter-argument to it is your counter-argument, which is we must have segregation because segregation is bad. There is no better way to revive white supremacy, and CNN has figured that out a long time ago. Hey you, black person over there, are you drinking out of my water fountain? Bitch, how about you stop being racist and stop appropriating my culture? Go drink somewhere else. It's sad we're still having to fight for equality in this day and age, but here I am because here you are, assuming you have equal rights. Your water fountain is over there, racist. That's right, there's a level of argument right now. So with that said, despite the moral panic from segregationists around this word, it's to no surprise that some people like myself have trouble taking them seriously. They're exploiting their ancestors' suffering as an excuse to reverse the situation they never went through, by the way, in whatever aspects they can get away with, so they can get the upper hand. It's pretty much as dirty as you could go. Assimilate yourself to victims of racial inequality by virtue of you sharing the same skin color as these victims, nothing else. Victims who are long dead and therefore have nothing to do with you and can't really give you any pushback as you use their suffering to justify more racial inequality because they were suffering in your name, and now white people have to repay you because the horrible things white people did back then. It might as well have been you since you're also white. Now the idea is that you don't reduce people to the color of their skin and make associations from there to then decide on the appropriate course of action. Say, these people can't speak like us because 200 years ago they weren't doing a very good job at it. They might have forgotten, but it's okay. They weren't even born yet, so we'll remind them. And if they don't comply, they're racist. Or maybe these black people can't be walking inside the store like that. You know how much stuff the last black person who walked in his store from us? It's okay, they probably don't remember either, but we'll remind them how much they owe us since the other black guy left. And if they don't pay up, they're racist. You could do that too, because after all, this goes both ways. If you're going to use moral outrage based on incidents that are condemnable, except you just reduce the situation to the skin color of the people involved and make a generalization from there. That line of reasoning is absurd and hateful, but it does cut both ways. In fact, it has for quite a while. Back when Europeans discovered Africa, they discovered people who weren't from the area and therefore didn't have the same culture or religion, didn't share the same values in a lot of ways, and since humans tend to be intolerant of differences, especially ideological differences, these people are nothing but savages in the eyes of the white people who discovered them, and since they were all black, and that's the opinion the Europeans already had of them, even after the Europeans took their liberties away and started indoctrinating them into their religion and culture, even once these original ideological differences that had started this stereotype in the first place were gone, it didn't matter and the injustices didn't change. They were still black, and that's the message Europeans had already chosen to make of those people's skin color. And here we are in 2023 doing the same thing while preaching that people learn about black history to educate themselves. Well, if this teaches you anything, is that history class will never make up for critical thinking skills. Maybe set aside the oppression of the past was horrible and it doesn't need to be avenged. We're now moving in a better direction with this century consisting of the Civil Rights Act, women no longer being second-class citizens, gay people having the right to marry, and so on. The culture around this non-acceptance vanishing quickly alongside it as it should. Slavery is long gone, and there's no point in seeking revenge for it. The auntie preaches we should, when there's no one alive to blame this on. That will only keep us from making progress like that which Martin Luther King brought upon us. How do you think he'd think of us trying to undo his progress in his name, also in the name of ending racism, but with the idea of being more racism to balance it out? he probably wouldn't be the biggest fan of his fan base turning on his ideology and preaching racial hatred in his name. No, he would not, but we can only assume since he is unfortunately dead. People like him died to fight for racial equality, actual racial equality, and then came people who had the freedom to speak freely, strictly thanks to people like him. And how were they using their speech? Well, Martin Luther King died to say that racism is wrong, and these people will only get praised for saying that opposing racism is racist. And of course they should get to say these retarded and awful, hateful things. Everyone should have the right to be wrong or even hateful out loud, but are they proud of themselves? Do you think their father figures would be proud of them? What exactly are they trying to accomplish? Clearly these people aren't like Martin Luther King, they don't think like him. He wanted peace, he wanted hatred to die down, and these people are just looking for reasons to make it come back, because victimhood complexes are satisfying, especially when they don't have to come at the cost of being an actual victim. You could just use others being victims and then use racism to make yourself the victim, and then claim you're fighting racism, because why not? Martin Luther King gave you that right, he didn't tell you how to use it. You could just find something to be mad at, try to spark more race hatred, then make yourself hatred by saying that people once again disagree with you now that your anti-racism position has turned racist, because this means that people are racist again, and you're once again a victim. And who knows, maybe another Martin Luther King will come around one day and save you from the escalation of the hatred you will have started, except you won't be the same you. You will be referring to those who pushed this agenda and got us back to step one. If racial hatred spears up again because white people having equality was too much for some black people, as well as some white people who realized that opinion was clickbait and was pretending to hate themselves for. No, all black people will be blamed, and what you're doing to white people will be found in reverse, but you probably won't have to bear that burden. Your kids probably will. What will you tell them? Because once we go back to generalizing wrongdoings based on the race we deem responsible, and we use that to spur up hatred, in other words escalation, that's inevitably where we're going to end up. Is that where we want to end up? Did Martin Luther King really do all he did for us to start all over? Well, my niggers, it's no longer up to him, but it's up to us. Just like the connotation of the nigger word is now up to us to decide on. So with that, I would personally say, who knows? Maybe when we start making these things into jokes, maybe when you start making jokes out of offensive things, because humor tends to be offensive to somebody, always, that's how you know that it's over. Nobody in class will reprehend you for making an anti-Semitic joke, although the Israel-Gaza conflict might have changed that a bit. But when I could hear my peers in high school reading from dark humor websites, what's the difference between a Jew and a pizza? Talking to the teacher, by the way. The pizza doesn't scream when you put it in the oven. And everyone laughed because we all knew nobody believed in the hatred, which is joking. That's how you know that this hatred is behind us. The Holocaust is behind us. That's done. You could tell we've put it to rest and moved on to better topics when we stopped making a huge deal out of it. When do we decide to do that? Well, it's really our choice. But when you make a racist joke, this by definition isn't racist, since what you're saying is racist, except that it's a joke, meaning you're saying this racist thing as a joke being something you don't really believe, otherwise it wouldn't be a joke. Let's make this a joke. Say nigger at every opportunity you have, not because you hate anyone, but because you don't hate anyone. And you want this hatred to be behind us. And because racial equality is worth fighting for, obviously, every bit of it. But if you want this whole culture of race hatred to be behind us, because it's about time, when this joke becomes accepted, that's how you know it's behind us. And that's why this joke of mine still hasn't gone old after so many years. My autism might have something to do with it too, I don't doubt that one bit. But let's do that.